Good afternoon, everyone. It is 3 o'clock. We are going to give everyone just a few more minutes to get logged in. But just a reminder that for participants, your microphones have been muted and videos are shut off. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function and we will try to answer as many questions as we can live. However, we can also answer questions via email if we're not able to answer those live today. Following today's webinar presentation, you will receive a PDF of today's presentation and the link to the recording. There are no CEUs offered for this series, and you can find previous recorded webinars at our website, and I will also make sure that you get the link for that. And I do also have listed the upcoming topics for this webinar series on self-determination. And with that, I think it is past 3 o'clock, and we will let Laura get started.
All right, welcome everybody. Today's first webinar is called Person-Centered Planning as Foundation for Self-Direction. And we will go over kind of from start to finish what it is to set up as SD arrangement and go through the whole process front to back. So hopefully we have some people that maybe are new to this, maybe are experienced as well, but hopefully we can learn something together as we go through these next couple of weeks of these webinars. So thank you for coming. And this is our plan for these 4 webinars today. Like I said at the beginning, always starts with good person-centered planning. Then we'll go through building a budget, setting up an arrangement, and then oversight and responsibility once it's all implemented. So sit back, relax, pull up some coffee, whatever, and we'll get started here. So person-centered planning, I'm sure as you know, has been around in Michigan since the 90s, but really has been around a lot longer than that. Historically, it kind of came out of Carl Rogers' theory about patient-centered therapy, and through time has kind of gone through iterative processes that really have established what it is today. So really, this is important to understand that person-centered planning isn't something that somebody just had a good idea for one day and then it just stuck, but that it's always improving and changing as we go along. So as you can see, this only gets us through to the late 80s. Then we get into Michael Small and some of the well-known people in the person-centered planning world, Jack Pierpoint, John O'Brien, Marcia Forrest, and kind of those planning tools that we talk about a lot of times, the path plans, essential lifestyles, all of the good things that lead to really good person-centered planning processes, all the way up to, more recently when we have kind of adopted the Charting the Life course, and the NCAPS, which is the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Planning Practices and Systems, was established. And Michigan has participated in that project over the last few years. And in the middle of all that was really when we started the Robert Wood Johnson pilot, which is really where what was called self-determination began back in the day. So right around the same amount of time that the person-centered planning policy became law in Michigan, soon after we started this pilot, and then by, I believe, 1999, self-determination and self-directed services was part of our policy and our mental health system. So, like I said, this is always something that is ever changing and improving throughout time, just like when you're working with an individual person. So really, person-centered planning, over time, as you might be familiar with, it started out, as a really coming from the people and coming from the idea that, people who receive services need to be able to have more control and individualization of their lives. And so it's really about defining what a good life is for a person. And as it became law and part of our mental health system, that more natural feel of people coming together to really support an individual kind of got a little more systematized, and we have our Medicaid requirements and all of that stuff. And so really we need to make sure that we're balancing the Medicaid requirements and the things we have to do in order to provide funding for people with that planning process. So we want to get away from the idea that person-centered planning as a whole is just one time of year that people are kind of getting together to meet and develop that plan, and then that's done. As you'll see in the next couple of slides, it's really an ongoing iterative process. And we're really talking about building someone's lives and really focusing on the planning more than that document, more than that plan. So that's why I have that in bold. It's really about the people that are involved and the support that the person gets. And we really want to see that the person-centered planning process, which is really what the content of that document should be, kind of matches. And that kind of goes to when we talk about the golden thread. We want to see a connection between an assessment, our pre-plan, what actually ends up in the document, and beyond. So that really establishes medical necessity, and that we're really showing that that process happened. So all of it is connected. So in order to keep us all kind of talking the same language and making sure that everybody's on the same page, just want to go through some definitions real quick. So when I say person-centered planning, we're really talking about not only the piece of person-centered planning that's called the person-centered planning process, which I think is what a lot of people talk about, that time where you're really getting into getting ready for a meeting, being able to specifically work on, who's coming to the meeting, where's it going to be, when's it going to be at, et cetera, and really what, this person's vision of a good life is and what services are going to be there to support them to get there. That's the person-centered planning process. And we're also talking about a person-centered process, which is really the rest of the time that a person is receiving service. So all of the time that a person is getting mental health services, they should be receiving that from a person-centered thinking standpoint, right? So just because that person-centered planning process is done, that doesn't mean that you kind of sit back and say, okay, well, we did that. We don't need to worry about that anymore. And so really keeping things in an idea of that you're constantly learning about this individual, that they're learning about kind of how things work through person-centered planning, is a continuous and ongoing process. The other distinction, if you haven't been to any of my trainings yet, is really talking about self-determination versus self-directed services. Self-determination is really at its core about self-determination theory and that human right that everybody has in this country to be self-determined. So if you look at self-determination theory, it's really the core of human well-being, and that is for everybody that we serve and ourselves. So you can't say, for example, that because so-and-so doesn't have a budget, they're not self-determined. However, self-directed services, which is really a different kind of service delivery model where you're taking those services and giving somebody more control over those services is something that some people will have and some people won't have. And then a broker, which we'll talk about a little bit later, possibly definitely in the future webinars, is a provider who helps the individual find and get needed services and supports. And if you see the acronyms PCP, ST, or SDS, they stand for person-centered planning, self-determination, self-directed services. So, like I said, the difference between self-determination is that that's for everybody. Self-directed services are for some, the people that choose that and want to go down that route. So when we're going through this person-centered planning process, and the minute that people enter services, we are in a person-centered mindset, a person-centered culture, person-centered thinking, and we are really looking at trying to assess where this person is in self-determination and addressing those needs. So encouraging their self-determination, be able to work on any of those skills that are missing. And in a minute, we'll show that that's actually part of medical necessity in everything we do. So even if somebody doesn't choose to self-direct, that doesn't mean that you don't work on their self-determination skills. Self-determination is really built into everything we do. We talk about independence, productivity, and community inclusion, or community engagement, just the term I like. And those are really what we're talking about when we talk about self-determination. So we want to make sure that as we deliver services, we're really putting people in a position to really control what's going on in their lives and to be able to flourish. So self-determination theory and basic psychological needs that really talks about, as long as people feel that they're in control of their own life, they're autonomous, they get to make their own decisions, they're not doing things because somebody else is doing something to them or for them, they're doing it of their own free will, that they feel competent, meaning that they feel like they do something well, that they know they're good at something, and they feel related to others. So they care about other people care about them, they feel like they have a sense of belonging, then they can be psychologically healthy and their behavior becomes more intrinsically motivated. This is kind of the core of well-being, which is, the point of mental health services. So as you'll see, autonomy is really independence. Our Medicaid manual talks about independence as, like I said, that free will, that being able to make a decision without coercion or somebody else doing something for you, not necessarily I can do something myself, but really that independent decision making. And competence is the same as productivity, right? We want to see that people are feeling like they've accomplished something, that they do something well in their lives. And relatedness is that community inclusion, right? Everything we do is to try to help people have a sense of belonging and be really a true member of their community and a citizens. So as you can see, the principles of self-determination, which you may be familiar with from the past, freedom, authority, support, responsibility, and confirmation, are really met through the self-directed outcomes. So deciding how to live a good life is providing more freedom than a traditional model where services are kind of just given and people are, they kind of get what they get and they don't really have a lot of determination of how the trajectory of their life goes. Authority is being able to control a targeted amount of dollars in their budget. Support is really making sure that the people that are there, either providing services or supporting them with whatever aspect of that self-directed service arrangement, be that the fiscal intermediary or the FMS or the CMH, that they're really being able to organize their own resources in a way that's meaningful to them. Then they have responsibility, which is, being able to use these public funds wisely. And really, confirmation is really about being able to have a role in that iterative process that I was talking about earlier, right? Making person-centered planning and self-directed services better each and every year. So self-determination and being able to feel like you have that autonomy, competence, relatedness is really the best way to make sure that people are being driven towards goals and making any change that they want in their lives is going to be the most lasting and pervasive. So really, all human behavior is goal directed, and that is really where we want to make sure that we're using person-centered planning to make sure that we're listening to that individual and where they want to go. Because if we don't have that motivation, then you can write the best plan ever, but if it's not important to that person, if they're not motivated by whatever it is that is written in there, it's not going to happen, and you're not going to get the outcomes that we're hoping for. So this intrinsic motivation is something that you can see the identified, integrated, and intrinsic, which is fancy ways of saying it's something that's really valued. So again, it's important to the person. It's something they're doing voluntarily. So again, it's autonomous. It's something that that person wants to do, and they're not being coerced into it. And again, like, they're intrinsically motivated. So they're doing that because they want to. It's just for the pleasure of doing the behavior itself. And so sometimes, especially in a traditional model, you get to, we need, for health and safety reasons, for whatever the reason is, we need John to do X, right? And so that kind of ends up in a plan, and it doesn't really have a lot to do with whatever John feels is important and whatever his vision of life is, but that there's something extrinsic for John that we're trying to change that behavior. So person-centered planning and setting up these arrangements really well is really about trying to look at how can we take the things that are really valuable and important to John and use them to try to help him make this next step in his life for things that might be important for John, right? So, and if you can use this, you will get good outcomes like good health, good well-being, and persistent behavior. So part of, once a person decides to do a self-directed service model, we really need to start thinking outside of the traditional model. So the first thing that you want to really think about is any assessments that have been done are really there to inform that planning process. So you're assessing needs and figuring out from that person and what they're saying their life needs are, how to move forward from there. But really going through this person-centered planning process is where you kind of solidify what actually ends up, in the plan. And then that's the basis for the person's budget. So being able to think outside of just the services, but also thinking about, once those services go into a budget, that person is going to be able to use those dollars in a more creative way. So what is it about whatever it is they want to their life trajectory to go towards, that they can use those dollars in a more creative way? So thinking about that. And there's no readiness tool for self-directed services. So, we shouldn't be making assumptions about someone's ability to maybe direct hire or be able to manage their own budget, figuring out whatever support that they'll need to be able to do that is kind of where it's at. So this beautiful picture, this person has a ton of support around them to make sure that their car goes really fast. So then again, if you have concerns about potential issues, we need to make sure that in these self-directed arrangements that there's, we call it information and assistance, but it just means really making sure that the person is educated about what that arrangement is like, what the expectations are. We talked about the responsibility and authority and freedom earlier. So there's limitations, right? There's a boundary that needs to be set about, what a person can and can't do. As we know, we have Medicaid funding to deal with. So making sure that a person understands all of the ins and outs of the process, as well as, the agreements and everything that need to be signed, is super important. And if there are concerns at the CMH level about maybe a health and safety issue, or just maybe some conflict of interest, you can use those SD agreements to really write in some safeguards to make sure that that agreement, or that arrangement, excuse me, is on the up and up. So these are all things to consider.
And I want to jump in, just like we do
Sure.
get into the weeds on all
Yeah.
of these aspects in the later webinars. So we're just trying to give an overview right now for people who are like, wait, what, what does that mean? How can we do that? We'll get into that.
Yes. I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with person-centered planning in general. So, um, so anytime there's any issues that are arising, any concerns, we really want to make sure we're using that person-centered planning process. So, like, if, for example, maybe somebody they're not very safe crossing the street, I don't know. Instead of just saying, well, we're not going to I don't know why I'm picking on John today, but whoever John is, maybe John, instead of saying, John, you're not crossing the street ever without, somebody with you, figuring out, with that person-centered planning team, how can we make this work? What kind of support does John need to be able to either learn how to cross the street safely, or to be able to do it, at a place where we feel that there's not a safety risk. So always using that process to figure out how to make things work. Self-directed services are really about, because you're going a step further and giving that person control and person-centeredness in their life. So you want to kind of try to figure out, is there a way to get to yes? So make it work. So, as you know, because person-centered planning is law, is not optional. And this is from the mental health code. And we really want to use this process to really discover who a person is and really figure out what is truly important to and about that person, what capacities and skills the person possesses, and making sure that that planning process is values-based, and with the idea that every single person is individual and they have their own unique capacities and skills. You really want to focus on a positive vision for that future for the person, and as always, focus on his or her strengths, preferences, and capacities, to be able to acquire new skills, abilities, and their own personal traits. So really focusing on what a person can do versus what they cannot do. We have plenty of people that have their own plans or assessments throughout their lives that we support, that focus on kind of what the person can't do, right? That's that medical model, right? So trying to flip that script and keep everything in that person-centered realm is super important. So in person-centered planning, believe it or not, we're really talking about the person-centered planning process, and services are really not the objective. again, you're really looking at what it is that person does, what they want to do, and the services are there to support them, not to be the goal of the plan. So instead of focusing on the oil change, we're focusing on driving, right? We're focusing on inclusion and the person thriving. We're thinking about what the purpose of everything is, what is the real outcome that we're looking for, what would be successful, right? So services help us get there, but you don't write the plan just to have services. So one of the many steps to that is really talking about quality pre-planning. So really, again, you're looking at what is the bigger picture. Quality pre-planning is more than just going through the checklist about figuring out, where we're having a meeting, who's going to be invited, etc., but really kind of figuring out what it is that that person's vision is for a good life, and what it is that they're going to, in this case, with their self-directed budget, be able to use those dollars for to make whatever their goals and objectives are happen. So if there's a need for a broker, for example, you might want to talk about that extra support that that person could have. And brokers are not just for self-directed services. A person might have a temporary need. Something's happening in their life. What comes to the top of my head right away is like, if somebody's moving, for example, support coordinator or case manager might not have the resources or time to fully support a person, an individual, to do all of the steps of moving, finding a new apartment, maybe finding stuff to go in the apartment, packing, figuring out, how to get their things from one place to the other, et cetera, et cetera. So that might be a good place to use a broker. But being able to discuss that with the individual and figure out, what that broker would do in supporting that person that's different than what the support coordinator or case manager would do, would be a great thing to talk about the possibilities of that in a pre-planning setting. So the actual planning process, we want to make sure that we're going through that, and again, focusing on that person's vision and their life. But the outcome is that we have a document that's really not only showing the things that we need to be able to receive that Medicaid funding, but also showing that that person-centered planning process happened. So whatever that vision is of the good life for the person, we want to see that there's improved life outcomes, that that person's working towards that, and that those goals support that process. So really your plan is focused on the vision of the good life, the goals and objectives that get that person there, and then the services underneath that are going to support them to get there. So in good person-centered planning, we don't want to just rely always on the things that the system has to offer, but really looking at things that the community has to offer. So one of the best things to do is to make sure that a person has a circle of support around them. As you probably know, in pre-planning, the person is able to invite whoever they want to their meeting, but really looking for as many people that care about this individual, hopefully want to see them succeed, really helps make that planning process go more smoothly. And the amount of different brains that you have at the table really helps to be creative and think of new and interesting either resources or ideas or ways that that person can progress. So looking for places in the community that would be of an interest to a person. So maybe somebody's really into gardening and that's very important to them. Maybe it helps them reduce their anxiety and therefore maybe some, dysfunctional behavior, I guess. So, are there people that also like gardening in the community? Are there people that can help find those people? Are there people is there a community garden? Is there a place that people who like to garden go to hang out? Can you build the circles of support and the people that would maybe improve that relatedness for that person? Using the Charting the Life course tools helps to focus some of these needs and maybe gaps where a person maybe doesn't have as much support. So it talks about technology, relationships. If that person doesn't have an opportunity to make a lot of decisions or have that free will, figure out how to kind of fill those gaps and work on any of those issues that they might need a little more support in. Again, it's about the people and those relationships, figuring out, how that team is going to work together to make things happen. And then all of that is really vital to building that budget, because whatever it is that that person is going to do and the services they're going to use, the support, they are really using all of that to be able to build their budget and figure out how they want to spend the money for the services that they're going to self-direct. So that's really they're increasing their own personal agency and being able to really drive the ship, through this whole process. So, unfortunately, a lot of the documents we have for person-centered planning end up being kind of a checklist, and we really should be having a lot of discussions and conversations. It doesn't have to all be in one meeting. I'm not saying necessarily you have to have a lot of meetings per se, but really person-centered planning can be an all-year process, like we were talking about. You can learn something, I don't know, let's say the plan is due in October, but you learn something in February that, would help make this person's life better. It would get them closer to whatever their vision of a good life is. Spread out that work, learn something about the person every month. Make sure that you're getting to know that person a little bit more as an individual, because you really want to make sure that we're always growing and checking in with the person, how things are going, and if anything needs to be changed or if anything's not working, so that things can be caught early and dealt with. And that planning process, not only for if everything is going well, but if things go sideways, it's always good to plan ahead for, so that if things go wrong, then there's a plan. And as part of that, the self-directed services, you have to have a backup plan, especially for those direct hires. Anyway, so it's a good idea to make sure that between a crisis plan and just a regular backup plan for if staff don't show up for whatever reason, they're sick or something happens, what's going to happen. So being able to be prepared for all of that will help keep everything stable and preempt any issues. So again, we really wanted to have deep and meaningful conversations throughout the process. A lot of people we work with will say something maybe that doesn't even, maybe a word or something that you're not going to get a full idea of what it is that person means from maybe some limited amount of words that a person says. So being able to figure out, like I gave an example at the waiver conference about like you might have somebody that says, I want to drive a motorcycle, for example, and after you actually talk about it for a while, you find out, oh, the person doesn't want to drive a motorcycle. They just want to own a leather jacket, which is two completely different things. So finding out, why it's important for somebody to drive a motorcycle can really help not only get to the outcome that the person's trying to get to, but really helps you target, the planning process to whatever their needs are. So make sure that you're using all the information that you glean from that process, and really don't be afraid to come up with non-service solutions. So again, looking for community connections, natural supports, and ways that anybody in the community who's trying to do something similar to what that person is doing, how would they solve that problem, or how would they get there? And that's especially important if somebody is asking for maybe something that's kind of costly, that you're not sure that Medicaid would typically cover, for example. Are we solving that issue in the same way that anybody else would? So again, having that good circle of support sometimes helps because it brings more brains to the table, and they can kind of creatively problem solve those issues. And really, again, making sure that that person is looked at as the expert and really driving that whole process. Really believing whatever it is that they're asking for, that's important to them, and going with that without too much, questioning maybe like what the real why is, but not dismissing it because at first glance, maybe, it's not understood why that thing is important to that person. So we want to make sure that in quality person-centered planning, that plan of service is really reflecting the person's goals and preferences. Again, goals should be about a person's life vision. So if it's really important for somebody, I don't know, like think about any kind of dreams that anybody's ever had before. Sometimes dreams might seem silly to other people, but if it really is something that's important to them or you, it's not as silly. And it doesn't necessarily mean if I don't know, somebody's saying they want to be a rock star, for example, like maybe they don't ever become a rock star, but working towards that goal helps them feel like they're doing something meaningful to them. So trying to get those goals to reflect whatever that life vision is, and preferences are really about being able to tailor whatever it is in their plan to the things that they prefer. So CLS, for example, can be pretty much delivered in a certain kind of way, or a nursing service, or occupational therapy, but there are different little preferences about maybe when the person receives those services or how they receive those services. CLS, for example, the person gets up in the morning, and do they want to get up and take a shower right away, or do they want to go sit in the kitchen and drink coffee? Like what are their preferences, and what's important to them for their own saneness, I guess. So we want to make sure that the plan has adequate strategies to address their assessed health and safety risks. So really, we want to make sure that anything that kind of raises a flag for a risk, we're kind of working through those things and seeing if we can come up with a solution that allows the person to keep trying whatever that thing is. Like the example earlier about crossing the street, for example. How do we figure out a solution to that, instead of kind of shutting down and saying, oh, we're just not going to do that because that's not safe? So really kind of using that process to problem solve and get that person to that next level is important. And then we want to make sure that the plan is developed in accordance to policies and procedures. And policies and procedures really talk about this plan has to be written through a person-centered planning process. So people have been doing really well writing a plan for a while, but it's not necessarily as evident that the person-centered planning process has always happened. And a lot of times it seems like the control in that plan is not coming from the person, but it's coming from somewhere else. So really, again, being able to show real person-centered planning is really, again, focused on that individual, allowing them to kind of drive that process, and being able to kind of talk about where those goals and objectives came from, having goals, for example, that are in the person's words, that are written in their own language, is a good way, for example, to show that that actually came from the person, is not just something that someone just wrote for them. So, and then one of the other performance measures is that the IPOS changes when the individual's needs changed. So, are we regularly reviewing that plan of service and making sure that whatever the original plan for an intent for that plan is working, and it's getting a person where they need to go. Sometimes the plan stays the same for years and years and years, and the person's not actually achieving any outcomes or objectives. So are we making sure that, even if that person's needs haven't changed in that sense, are we making sure that we're adjusting? And then, of course, if a person does have more needs for extra service, etc., that we're doing an addendum to make sure that that person is supported. And then making sure that each time that the person's being visited, that there's really a purpose for reviewing that plan, like I said, and then making sure that their self-directed arrangement is going well, and there's really a reason for that visit. So once you're in this process, you really want to make sure that part of that information and assistance and things that we were talking about is making sure that a person understands their responsibilities as an employer. And like Marie said, we'll get into some of the details of that in our next webinar, or the second webinar after this one. So making sure that people understand their responsibilities as an employer and any management skills they'll need, so they can do the best job possible, work on communication skills, academic skills. So like in these arrangements, if someone's going to do a direct hire, for example, they will be in charge of scheduling unless they have some other support that they assign that to. And sometimes that means being able to calculate out hours and how many, if someone wants to work part-time and the other person wants to work full-time, how many hours do you have authorized and how do you divide that up? So sometimes that's a skill that a person would need. You want to make sure that if people need any help with self-advocacy, so they're going to be responsible for making sure that people show up to work, that they're doing whatever it is that the person wants them to do while they're at work. So you want to make sure that they're able to speak up for themselves if things aren't going well, be able to give feedback to their employees. And if they need some support with that, then that's something to look at. And then, if somebody is really struggling in a lot of these areas, again, this might be a situation where you think about putting a broker in to really help them. So as you're doing the person-centered planning process and you're thinking about how we're going to set up this arrangement, if there are gaps in needs for some of these skills, these are things that you could put objectives in, because again, this is part of being able to direct your own life, part of being able to maintain your independence, productivity, and community inclusion. And that's what actually, whether or not you are going to self-direct or not, because many of those skills are universal and really could work even if you're not going to self-direct. So keep those in mind. So once you are writing the plan of service, the documentation requirements specific to these SD arrangements, you want to make sure that whatever kind of support that it's chosen to help them. So again, if they're going to use a broker, if they have a guardian or informal representative that's going to help them, if they're going to do it by themselves, they're going to use a broker. If they're, I don't know, maybe they have a neighbor or friend who's willing to help. So making sure that you understand the ins and outs of who's going to be responsible for what. And it doesn't necessarily have to be super formal. The person could use supported decision making, for example. So for the most part, they're making the decisions themselves and managing that arrangement. But when they need help, they're going to go to certain people to kind of get advice and make decisions that way. The person is able to choose how they want to do their documentation. So that needs to be included in the IPS. A lot of CMH have their own templates. So if the person wants to use one of those templates, that's absolutely fine. But if they don't want to use the template, they want to do something else, they just need to make sure that that documentation meets Medicaid standards and just kind of identify whether that's going to be documentation maybe in a notebook that stays in the house and then is made available to the CMH when needed, or maybe something more inclusive in the timesheet that lists out goals and objectives and what their workers worked on that day. It's really pretty flexible and up to them how they want to choose to document. You want to identify who their financial management service provider, which is also known as a fiscal intermediary, will be. That's usually pretty easy because usually it's authorizations are in there, but making sure that there's an indication that that was their choice of providers, and then making sure that the copy of the plan and the budget is given to all parties so that everybody kind of is on the same page of what's going on. And those should both be signed before the arrangement goes into effect. So throughout the year, we want to make sure that everybody is getting information on what this is, how it works. If somebody chooses to direct or direct hire, I should say, what those duties of being an employer of record would be. So there's quite a few responsibilities that a person takes on as an employer, and some people are all in and they are ready to do all those things, and other people, if you present all of those responsibilities, they don't want to do it, or they would like to choose a different arrangement, maybe an agency with choice model, or what we call agency supported self-direction, or some other model that they don't have the managing responsibilities. They also, and this is part of the policy, they need to either be trained how to act as a supports broker, or already have that information. So basically, again, knowing all the ins and outs of how the arrangement works, and being able to access the support they need is really important. So this again is for everybody that receives services. There are people that live in either group homes or foster care who, because of the way that we wrote up our waivers, technically eligible to self-direct their services unless they're going to get out of those settings. But otherwise, this is something that you should be able to give everybody at least an overview so that they understand what it is and the things that they might need to be able to work on to be able to do that. So, and every CMH should have training, which I don't think is universal at this point, but they should have a training for an employer of record, which is what we call in a direct hire arrangement. That person is the employer legally, and so they need to know basic skills of hiring and firing people, managing people, how to do timesheets and scheduling, that documentation like we talked about, and then maintaining their staff eligibility. So once things are up and running, we're doing regular check-ins, making sure the arrangement is going well. The person will get monthly budget reports to show if they're staying in budget. So they need to be able to understand those reports. Making sure that they're communicating with all the parties. So between the FMS or financial management service provider and the CMH to kind of keep everything on the up and up and communicate anything that is an unmet need or maybe there's an issue that's arising, making sure that the correct people know what's going on. Making sure that we're checking in at periodic reviews to see that things are going well or maybe not going well, making changes as necessary. And then, really kind of exploring any options for, let's say people have money left over in their budget, or they only chose to self-direct some of their services, but they want, maybe more responsibility, or they want to change something. Being able to explore if there are any options for those kinds of things. Sometimes people want to give somebody a raise or something like that, for example, which is dependent on, hopefully that's planned for in advance, but if not, you want to make sure that there's enough money in the budget. So it's all dependent on those factors. So again, really throughout the person-centered planning process, whether somebody is self-directing or not, we should really working on building skills to self-direct and those employer responsibilities, really like the soft and what they call soft and hard skills of being an employer. So some things like being able to recognize burnout and things that are, like more on the soft side of things, like being compassionate and being able to understand your employees' needs as well as important as being able to do a good interview, for example. And then again, like anything that a person wants to work on to get better at so that they maybe can self-direct in the future or can get better at the arrangement they already have, you can use that as part of their plan for an objective. So throughout the planning process, we have different phases. So there's a learning phase, which is kind of continuous and goes on forever. The planning phase, which is again like that person-centered planning process part, and then implementation. So in that learning phase, we're again talking about that information and assistance and really educating people about what this is and what it's all about, helping people understand what a broker is and what it could do to help them. In the planning phase, we're really kind of making decisions. So they've learned about what all of this is about, and now they're deciding, like, is this something I want to move forward on this year, or maybe we wait till later, and then really planning for how to use their budget through that planning process and how they're going to spend the dollars in what fashion. And then as they're implementing, be able to provide the ongoing support. And they're really, through that process, every time that one of their staff works, when they sign off on their timesheet, they're really kind of authorizing and saying, yes, this service was provided as written on this timesheet, and be able to send that off to the FMS so that it can get paid. So really that's where I guess the rubber meets the road, and that responsibility is coming in.
Laura, I think this is a good time. We did have a question that asked about what we mean when we say that the employer can choose their method of documentation. I don't know if you can see that question, or if you'd like me to read it to you.
Go ahead and read it. I can't see anything.
Okay. She's asking if we can elaborate what is meant by how the employer chooses to document services provided. For example, can they say that I don't want my worker to document for CMH's needs, which might look very different? So I'm pulling up the language from the technical requirement so that I can copy that in the chat while you answer that.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's not necessarily the content of the documentation. It's more of the template, I guess, for lack of better words. So there needs to be enough information in there that that the person can anybody that reads it can understand that a service was provided. You need your time and date and location and all that good stuff, a signature. So the basics of Medicaid documentation, which I think Marie, what was in the guidance is straight from CMS of what that documentation is. So it might be a little more straightforward, but the point is that how that is documented can really be up to that person. So really whatever their style is for, if they want something that's kind of a long narrative, if they want something a little more simple, they should be able to design that the way they want. And I think generally people, they're fine with if there's already a template or something that's already made, then they'll go with that. Can you guys hear my dog? I hope not. Any more questions, Marie?
No, not right now.
Okay. So as we were getting into the person-centered process, again, this is ongoing. So in those different phases, first is kind of like I said, learning about the person. And this is where you would educate about self-directed services. In pre-planning, if you have to the point where someone's decided they want to go through with, getting self-directed services, that's where you would decide kind of the model that they want to do. So there's 3 types. They can do all 3. They can do one. They can choose none. But so you have a direct hire, what's called agency with choice or agency supported self-determination, and purchase of service, which is contracting directly with a professional who's not currently impaneled with the CMH. So that's a great thing to talk about during pre-planning. Then during the actual planning meetings, or in that planning area, really making a spending plan for how that budget is going to be divvied out and where those dollars are going to be spent. And then implementation, this is where the person would hire, if they're hiring direct workers, like that can be that broker, CLS workers, it could be supported employment, it could be respite. Basically almost every service can be self-directed. So if there's something that a person would like to, I've seen some pretty creative arrangements where people have been able to switch their supported employment over to something a little more tailored to exactly what they need. So, so that's where they'd be able to start hiring those people. And then the implementation monitoring, the person's really managing their arrangement while the CMH is kind of providing that monitoring and oversight. So things to consider, where the control is in these arrangements is really with the person. So the employees of this individual, they're not contracted employees from the CMH. So a lot of the rules and regulations that apply in, an agency provider or somebody that is contracted with the CMH are different. So one of the first things that comes to mind is about training, for example. So PHPs and CMHs have come up with these big grids of training that cover universally everything that you could possibly think of that needs to be trained. But those are not the trainings specific for staff qualifications. So in these situations, these employees need to be qualified to provide Medicaid services, but they don't necessarily need like compliance training or English as a second language and all of the other trainings that can be provided. The employer record in these cases, if they want trainings above and beyond those staff qualifications, that's up to them because they're the employer. So if you think about it, like you or I would not go into a business in town and just start telling people how to train their employees. It's kind of the same thing because this person is now the employer, and beyond the things that their employees need to be qualified to provide services, they shouldn't be told how to train. The budget and the employees, again, are not CMH managed. So CMH should not be telling the person when the employees can and can't work. The things in the budget, once the budget is signed and planned out and ready to go, that's really in control of that employer record, and anything to do with the budget is really kind of discussed between the FMS and them. If there's something that needs to change or go above and beyond that, then you can open up that person-centered planning process again if need be, and make changes that way. But otherwise, it's kind of in a different realm. So, and then with these arrangements, the medical necessity, amount, scope, integration, etc., is really dictated by that plan of service. And once that's signed off on and ready to go, once everything is in that budget, that's what gives you the flexibility and I guess permission to kind of use those funds in a different way than you typically would in a traditional model. And we want to make sure that risk mitigation for the CMH, anything that's an issue that is a concern to the CMH, it should really be thought through before the implementation of the arrangement, and not after. So if you have situations that the CMH is really concerned about fraud, waste, and abuse and things that are maybe going sideways, it might be because there's not enough support, not enough person-centered planning, not enough education and information and assistance that's going on in the front end to make sure that those things are prevented to begin with. And we'll get into more of that as we progress through our webinars. So once you've gone through the planning process, you'll have that budget and spending plan that's developed, and really should be outlined about, kind of line items like in a regular budget, right? About what's going to be spent where. Like I said, medical necessity is established through that plan of service. So once the budget is starting to be spent, you don't need to worry so much about the medical necessity because that's already established through there. The agreed on goals, supports, and services will also be established. The FMS will be chosen, the type of arrangement should be chosen, and the team as a whole should kind of know what's going to happen next. So that is a long overview of how to use person-centered planning to make sure that you're supporting these arrangements. And really good self-directed services can't happen without good person-centered planning. So it's really important that these things are intertwined and done together. And I will open up the room for questions. Do we have any questions, Heather or Marie?
I don't see any yet, but I do just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function, and then we will be able to answer those.
There is a question about the slides, and yes, this webinar is being recorded, and a recording along with a copy of the slides will be available at the ARC's website within the week.
So the next piece of, putting these arrangements together, in detail is really developing that budget. So in Michigan, the budget is developed through that person-centered planning process. And we have had, I think, many presentations on the budget, but that is the next part. So on Thursday, if you're available at 3 o'clock, we'll go over the budget and kind of go through an example of a budget and what the pieces and parts are and how to make that work. And we hope to see you then and for the rest of our webinars as well. So if we don't have any more questions, I guess we will give you some time back for your day.
Thank you, Laura, and we will go ahead and end the webinar for today, and I look forward to seeing you back on Thursday to talk about budgets.
Thank you.